A 51-year-old woman boards a private yacht with a man she barely knew, lured by the thrill of a night out on the ocean. Hours later, she is discovered in a state so brutal that even investigators struggled to describe it. Her mouth torn, her body violated, her life hanging by a thread. What really happened on that yacht, and why did this man invite her aboard in the first place? Tonight we unravel a case of wealth, desire, and deadly secrets, a story that will leave you questioning who you can trust when the waves close in. This is not the kind of story you hear every day. A woman in her 50s meets a man who seems exciting, confident, and persuasive. One night she steps onto his yacht, expecting adventure and escape, but instead finds herself walking into a nightmare. What really happened on the open water that night is far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Before we dive deep into the case, I need you to subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications. Stories like this are built to keep you on edge, and I do not want you to miss what comes next. Subscribing also helps us continue to bring you these detailed investigations, so hit that button now. Now get ready, because in the next chapter we will look closely at who this woman really was, the life she lived before that yacht party, and why she may have let her guard down at the wrong moment. Her name was Linda Morgan, a 51-year-old woman from Miami, Florida. She was known among friends as independent, lively, and always willing to take a chance on new experiences. After raising her children and going through a difficult divorce, Linda was searching for excitement again, something to remind her that life was not over just because she had crossed 50. Miami had always been a city of temptation, full of nightclubs, endless beaches, and the kind of nightlife that promised escape from everyday struggles. For Linda, the weekends were her chance to feel alive. She enjoyed the social scene, and that was exactly where she met him. A man who seemed to understand her need for attention and affection. A man who spoke with a charm and confidence that could sweep anyone off their feet. Friends described Linda as cautious with strangers, but that night was different. The man's offer of a yacht party sounded like an adventure too thrilling to resist. She told one friend she would be fine, that it was just a night of fun on the water. Nobody expected that decision to be the last safe one she would ever make. The man who invited Linda onto his yacht introduced himself simply as Mark. To those who only met him briefly, he seemed like the kind of man who had it all. Expensive suits, a confident smile, and the aura of someone who moved easily through Miami's nightlife. But beneath that polished image was a story no one really knew. Mark was 39, well-built and sharp with his words. He told Linda he worked in real estate, that he had connections all over the city, and that his yacht was just one of the many luxuries he enjoyed. To someone like Linda, who had tasted hardship after her divorce, his lifestyle looked like a dream. He knew how to talk about success in a way that made people believe every word, even when those words hid the truth. In reality, very little about Mark's life was what it seemed. His business dealings were questionable at best, and people close to him whispered about debts, failed deals, and sudden disappearances from the city whenever pressure closed in. His yacht, though impressive, was not a symbol of stable wealth. It was more of a stage, a prop he used to lure in those who wanted a taste of luxury, if only for a night. Linda had no reason to suspect this. To her, Mark represented an escape, a chance to step into a world far removed from her own. She ignored the subtle signs, the moments when his charm seemed forced, the way his eyes scanned every room as if he was always calculating something. She chose to believe the image he presented, not realizing that behind the smile was a man who carried secrets darker than she could imagine. What nobody knew at the time was that Linda wasn't the first woman Mark had invited onto his yacht, and she wouldn't be the first to regret it. It was a warm Miami evening when Linda stepped onto the yacht. The water shimmered under the fading light, and the city skyline glowed in the distance. For Linda, it felt like the start of something exciting, almost like she had been transported into a movie. Mark welcomed her with a drink already in hand, his voice smooth, his smile rehearsed. She laughed nervously, not knowing this would be the last time she felt safe. The yacht itself was polished and gleaming, but eerily quiet. There were no crowds, no loud party music, just soft background sounds, and Mark insisting they would have a more private evening together. Linda hesitated for a moment, expecting more people to show up, but Mark brushed it off, telling her others had canceled, and that it would be better this way. A private party, just for them. As the boat pushed further from the shore, Linda's nerves flickered. She checked her phone briefly, but the signal was already beginning to fade. She tried to relax, sipping her drink, reminding herself that she deserved this night. She deserved to be treated, to feel wanted, even if only for a few hours. But subtle things began to unsettle her. The way Mark watched her every movement, the way he poured her another drink before she even asked, and the way he spoke less and less as the boat drifted deeper into the dark water. It was no longer the charming man she had met days earlier, but someone colder, someone waiting for something. By the time Linda realized this night was not going to be what she expected, it was already too late. At first, Mark tried to keep up his charm. He leaned in close, told Linda stories about his supposed travels, about people he claimed to know, about money he said he had made. But Linda began to notice the cracks. His tone grew sharper, his eyes darker, and his smile started to fade. The act was slipping. The drinks kept coming, stronger each time, and Linda felt her body getting heavier. She tried to slow down, but Mark insisted she keep drinking, brushing off her hesitation with a cold laugh. The warmth of the evening air now felt suffocating, and the silence of the open water wrapped around her like a warning. Mark's questions grew invasive. He asked about her past, her failed marriage, her children. He pressed her on details that made her uncomfortable, almost as if he wanted to remind her of every insecurity she carried. Linda shifted in her seat, trying to steer the conversation away, but his eyes locked on her like a predator studying prey. By now, Linda's instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. The way Mark's voice dropped when he spoke, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table just a little too tightly. She tried to stand, to suggest heading back to shore, but he stopped her with a firm hand on her arm. The smile was gone completely. What sat in front of her now was not a charming stranger, but a man who had lured her into isolation with a purpose she had not yet seen. The party was over. The nightmare was about to begin. The silence of the water made every sound sharper. The clink of glass, the creak of the yacht shifting against the waves. Then suddenly, the shift in Mark's body language became undeniable. His hand tightened around Linda's wrist with a grip that made her wince. When she tried to pull back, he leaned forward, his face inches from hers, his voice low and threatening. Linda's attempt to reason with him only seemed to fuel his aggression. She told him she wanted to go back, that the night had gone far enough. But Mark was no longer listening. His charm had evaporated. His eyes carried a cold intensity, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment all along. The struggle that followed was brutal. Neighbors on nearby boats later reported hearing muffled sounds, but nothing that made them realize the horror unfolding just a few hundred yards away. Linda's screams were swallowed by the waves. On that isolated yacht, she had no escape, no one to hear her desperation. By the time it was over, Linda was left battered and broken. The injuries were so severe that investigators would later describe them as among the most disturbing they had seen. Her mouth was torn, her body violated. She was alive, but barely, clinging to consciousness on the deck of that yacht under the indifferent glow of the Miami moonlight. And Mark? He didn't rush to help her. He didn't show a shred of remorse. Instead, he stood over her in silence, watching, as though the violence itself had been his goal all along. For hours, the yacht drifted under the dark sky. Mark stayed eerily calm, moving around the boat as if nothing had happened. Linda lay motionless, barely breathing, her body torn from the violence she had endured. The clock ticked past midnight, and the waves carried them farther from the Miami shoreline. The break in silence came not from Linda, but from a passing fishing vessel. The crew noticed the yacht floating without much movement, its lights flickering oddly. At first, they thought it was just another party boat where the guests had passed out from too much drinking, but something felt off. The vessel slowed, circling closer, and one of the fishermen shouted across the water. No response. Only the faint silhouette of Mark moving on deck. That was enough for suspicion to build. The crew radioed the Coast Guard, reporting unusual activity. Within an hour, authorities were on their way, approaching what would soon be revealed as the scene of unimaginable violence. When the Coast Guard officers finally boarded, the image seared into their memory was Linda, barely alive, covered in injuries that told a story without words. Her torn mouth, her brutalized body, and her eyes half open in a daze of pain. She could not speak, but she was still breathing, clinging to life against all odds. Mark stood nearby, arms crossed, cold and detached. He offered no explanation, no panic, no sign of guilt. It was as if he expected to be untouchable, even as evidence surrounded him. For the officers who had seen countless cases, this one stopped them in their tracks. They knew immediately, this was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was something much darker. The investigation began the moment Linda was rushed to the hospital. Doctors worked frantically to stabilize her, documenting the extent of her injuries. The brutality was undeniable. There were no signs of an accident, no possibility of her wounds being self-inflicted. This was deliberate, sustained violence. Meanwhile, Mark was taken into custody. From the very beginning, his demeanor stunned investigators. He was calm, even arrogant, answering questions with short-clipped sentences. He refused to acknowledge Linda's condition, acting instead as though he were the victim of some misunderstanding. When pressed about the events of the night, he changed his story repeatedly, each version unraveling under even the slightest scrutiny. Detectives searched the yacht, and what they found was damning. Bloodstains on the deck, broken glass near where the struggle had taken place, clothing ripped and scattered. Every detail pointed to a violent encounter, yet Mark showed no emotion when confronted with the evidence. He sat through questioning as though it were a minor inconvenience. Forensic specialists later confirmed what investigators already knew. Linda's injuries matched the scene. The torn flesh, the bruising, the trauma. Every detail aligned with the evidence pulled from that yacht. It was a clear, undeniable case of assault. And yet the biggest challenge was still ahead. Linda was alive, but in no state to testify. The case rested heavily on physical evidence, witness statements, and Mark's behavior in the aftermath. For prosecutors, it would be a battle not only to prove what he had done, but to dismantle the image he had built for himself as a man of charm and wealth. The courtroom was packed from the very first day. Journalists filled the benches, their pens ready to capture every word. Locals whispered in the halls, some in disbelief that a man who looked so polished could be capable of such violence. Others said they had never trusted him, that his charm was always too calculated, too rehearsed. Mark walked into the courtroom dressed sharply, as if still trying to project the image of success, but behind him trailed the weight of evidence he could not shake. The prosecution laid it out piece by piece, showing the jury photos from the yacht, medical reports from the hospital, and recordings of his shifting statements under interrogation. Each detail painted him not as a victim of circumstance, but as a predator who had orchestrated the entire night. Linda herself could not take the stand. Her injuries were too severe, her recovery ongoing. But doctors spoke for her. They explained in clinical detail what had been done to her body. Their words hung in the air like a heavy fog, forcing the jury to confront the brutality without Linda having to relive it before them. The defense tried to frame the incident as consensual, a night of passion gone wrong. They questioned her lifestyle, her decision to board the yacht, even her drinking. But each attempt was dismantled by evidence. The blood, the broken glass, the torn clothing, and above all, the medical testimony left little room for doubt. As the trial moved forward, the public reaction grew louder. People outside the courthouse held signs demanding justice. News channels replayed clips of testimony night after night, branding Mark as the face of cruelty. The mask he had worn for years was gone, and in its place stood a man stripped of excuses, exposed before the world. After weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and relentless coverage, the jury finally returned with their decision. Mark was found guilty on all major counts, including assault and attempted murder. The judge did not hold back, handing down a lengthy prison sentence that ensured he would spend decades behind bars. For the first time, his confident posture broke. The man who once believed he could control every outcome was led away in silence, stripped of the freedom he thought he could never lose. Linda's survival was nothing short of remarkable. Though scarred physically and emotionally, she stood as living proof of resilience. Her family described her as strong, determined to reclaim her life despite the pain she carried. Doctors called her recovery a miracle, one that shocked even the most seasoned professionals. The case left Miami shaken. It served as a grim reminder that danger often hides behind the mask of charm, that one night of misplaced trust can change everything. For investigators, it was one of the darkest crimes they had seen play out on the open water. For the public, it was a story they would never forget. And now I want to hear from you. What do you think about this case? Was justice served, or do you believe the punishment could never truly match the crime? Share your thoughts in the comments, and while you are at it, let us know where you are watching from. I want to see how far this community of true crime thinkers reaches across the world. If you found this story gripping, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on, because the next case is already on the way. And trust me, you do not want to miss it. Until then, stay safe, stay aware, and I will see you in the next one.